Welcome to Everyday Martial Artist, a weekly podcast where you'll join me, Brian Doucette, as I interview a different martial artist each episode and hear their story. Some guests you may have heard of, and some you probably haven't. Be sure to subscribe where all your favorite podcasts are available. Also visit our website at everydaymartialartist.com. If you're listening for a specific interview, I sure hope you'll stay and check out the other episodes. A very special thank you to Topher Williams for our custom theme music. And now, the newest episode of Everyday Martial Artist. Everyday Martial Artist is brought to you by KOOnline.com for all your martial arts needs. Sparring and safety gear, rank belts, uniforms, weapons, patches, and more. Wholesale supplies made by martial artists for martial artists. Visit us today at ko-online.com. Hello and welcome to the newest episode of Everyday Martial Artist. I'm your host, Brian Doucette. Another very special guest. As every show, we have a very special guest, but this is someone I've known for. I met him originally, I think it was around 2006 or 2007. He was reffing an MMA fight in Fargo, North Dakota that I was judging, and got to chat with him quite a bit that night and kind of stayed in contact over the years through social media. The first time I've seen him now in about 15 years, and a name that is kind of synonymous with the world of mixed martial arts, kind of legendary, as some might say. I'm very excited to talk to Mr. Fred Ettish today. How are you doing today, sir?
Doing great. Thank you very much.
So let's just kind of start now. A lot of people, of course, heard of you because of UFC. You were one of the pioneers in MMA back in the day. But let's go back even further, kind of your beginning in martial arts, maybe even before you started taking lessons. Was there something was there a movie you saw, a TV show, something? Did you have a friend doing it? Where would that initial spark come from that gave you the interest in martial arts?
Well, because I'm as old as I am, I go way back, and it was back in the 60s, and martial arts were still really new, and there was a lot of mystery surrounding them and a lot of unknown. I looked at it as a way to quit getting my ass kicked. I think a lot of people start for that reason. And I was a skinny little kid in the shadow of the big city of New York. I lived just across the border in a town called Norwalk, Connecticut. And I knew that there was martial arts around, and I knew I was tired of being scared all the time. And I thought, well, hey, maybe this will make me tough. And so I ended up in a class that was taught by an individual who my brother at the time knew. And it was a private class, so you had to know somebody to get you in the door. And so my brother put in a word for me, got me in the door, and that's how I got started. Looking back, I know that the gentleman who was teaching it was not what he said he was. But back in those days, there was, of course, no internet. There was no way to check anything out. And I was probably 12 or 13 years old. Anybody that was in their 20s, like this guy was, walked on water, didn't even get the bottoms of their feet wet. And so he said he was an 8th degree black belt, and he had rankings in Kung Fu as well. And he was looked from the outside looking in through young eyes, he looked like he was very good. And so obviously that wasn't true, and I know that now. But I will say that he taught a good class, and he set a real good foundation for me. We worked really hard. We did basics. We did some kata. We did a lot of sparring, and that set a real good foundation for me. So I'm really in his debt, even though, like I say, I know that his claims were not legitimate. His class was legitimate, if that makes any sense.
What style was that?
It was a Chinese Kempo style. Okay. I don't know the exact name of it, but it was as far as I can remember, it was a Chinese Kempo. Sadly, martial arts does tend to draw, it seems, more than its share of snake oil salesmen, hucksters, people who hide behind cloaks of mystery and I'm too deadly, I can't show you this, or I learned from this secret master on an island somewhere and nobody would know who he was, but he was great. And, it's a little harder to get away with that nowadays because you have to prove who you are. And I think MMA has done a lot for that. Jiu-jitsu has done a lot for that because in sports like that, which are related to martial arts, you have to walk the walk. You can't just talk the talk. You can't hide on the mat.
Exactly.
On the mat, the truth comes out. And so if you're not real, you'll get exposed. So I think in this day and age, people now, even if they're not involved in MMA or Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu or one of the direct contact sports, wrestling, I got to throw that in there too, because there's very few people in the world that are tougher than a good wrestler. They have taught people to look into things more and to not just believe things on face value. If you say you can do something, if you say you are something, they're going to want to see what you are.
I like that though. The truth comes out on the mat. That would make a great T-shirt.
Yeah. Well, let's market that.
There we go. That's some good marketing.
My Okinawan karate teacher used to always tell us too. He said, if you don't sweat, you don't learn. And he would also say, shut up and train, which was directed at a lot of people who were, like we were saying, that like to talk a lot, but didn't like to do a lot. Yep. And it drove him crazy when he would come to the States and see that. So, that's good advice for anybody. Shut up and train.
So now that age 12, 13, how long did you stay with that first instructor before you looked for something else?
Well, it was probably between a year and 2 years, and then I didn't really have a choice. I ended up, my family situation was very bad. I was living with my dad. My mom was off with what became, I guess, technically my stepfather, but I don't want to give him that kind of credit because he was a piece of human garbage. And I ended up following them first out to the middle of nowhere, Montana. And I am serious. That was probably 1970-ish, somewhere in there. And I went from, like I said, living in the suburbs in the shadow of New York City to the closest town was a little town called Lavina, Montana, Lavina. And it was in between Billings and the big city of Roundup. And Roundup had, and they were very proud of this, they had a hanging tree in town that had been used as recently as sometime in the 40s. And they were really proud of that. We lived in a 4-room shack, literally, with no electricity at the very end of a road, and to call it a road was giving it the benefit of the doubt. It was basically the last mile or so was 2 tire tracks through an alfalfa field. So, of course, no running water, had to pump water by hand for the house. We had another well for the livestock that had a 3-horse Briggs and Stratton hooked up to it. And so it was culture shock. And, of course, out there was no martial arts. There was a lot of hay bales. And so nice. I found out really quickly that, thinking that I was a pretty tough city kid, come to find out that, man, I didn't know jack. Because these kids, I ran my mouth a little bit. I was a punk, and these kids tolerated it for just a little bit, and then they got sick of my crap. And I'll never forget it. We were out in Phi Ed class, and we were playing soccer, and it was warm out still. And this one kid took his shirt off. His name was Randy Lewis. They called him Louie, and he was skinny as a rail. And I laughed at him because he was so skinny. And this other kid that came there from Texas, he said, "Well, you better be careful. Louie's a lot tougher than he looks." And Louie proceeded to show me. He took me down and turned me inside out and upside down and every which way but loose. And I was in shock. I couldn't believe it. But as I started to live out there, I saw all the work that these guys throw in hay bales, firewood. Everything was with their hands. And the hardest work I did in the city was pushing a lawnmower. And I thought that was really tough. And I didn't want to do that. Or shoveling the sidewalk the few times that it snowed. So I found out in a heartbeat that I was not tough, and I'd probably better keep my mouth shut.
Probably a good thing to learn.
Yeah.
So then how long of a break before you got to start training in martial arts again?
Let's see. I ended up going back to Connecticut, trained more, and then ended up like an idiot back with I don't know how much you want to talk about, but there was a lot of backstory in between all these moves around, and a lot of trauma, a lot of family issues. But I ended up back with my dad, and then back with my mother and her husband up here in Minnesota, out in Clearwater County. And then I finished high school there, ended up in a foster family. I don't even want to call them a foster family. They were so much more than that. They didn't have to take me in. It wasn't anything official. They just took me in and took care of me. And fed me and clothed me. And I worked. It was a dairy farm, and I shoveled. I was on both ends of the cow. I carried silage and hay to go in the front end, and when they recycled it out the back end, I shoveled that and put that out in the manure spreader. So I was well-rounded around the cow. And so that's how I graduated high school, because without them, I don't think I would. I had no place to stay. Stepfather had burned the house down. Wow. He left town because he was wanted in a lot of places, and whenever he got in trouble, he had to pack up everything and leave. That's why we left Montana. He got crossways with the law, and of course, no internet. It took him a little while to figure out who he was, and in the interim, we took everything we had, threw it in the back of a Chevy station wagon, and away we went in the middle of the night. Jeez. They dropped me off in the airport at Pocatello, Idaho, and said, "Go home to your father."
Wow.
So
that's crazy.
It's been a wild ride. But anyway, graduated high school, joined the Marine Corps when I was 17, and the Marine Corps was great, but I squandered a beautiful opportunity because I spent a year over in Okinawa, but I didn't train. The Marine Corps had this strange idea that because I was under contract to them, that I needed to do exactly what they said, and they didn't care much what I wanted to do. And I was in the infantry, but for some reason, I scored really high on all my tests, my intelligence tests and my aptitude tests, and they saw that and they went, "Oh, this guy can put 2 and 2 together, and every once in a while he can come up with 4. So let's not only put him in the infantry, let's put him in the office too, and help him, have him help us here." So I was real busy, and in 4 months I was on board ship. We were down the Philippines and all around in the Western Pacific, and so I missed an opportunity to train with some really, really special people over there. But when I came back, it was 1977, got out of the Marine Corps, went back home to Minnesota, and then I started training in 1979 again there with a guy who had connections to Okinawa.
Okay.
And then from there, I developed my own connections to Okinawa and was very fortunate to have a very strong connection with a magnificent Okinawan karate instructor from there.
And which style of that from Okinawa?
One of the Shorin-ryu styles. It's
Okay.
It's called Matsumura Kempo. My teacher developed that style from his teachings from other very very prominent teachers over there. But he ended up starting his own system because sadly, even over there, there's a lot of politics involved, and there was a lot of bickering. And some people, when his main teacher died, there was people saying, "Oh, I'm the number one guy." Another guy saying, "No, I'm the number one guy." And he just finally got so tired of it, he just broke away. He made his own system, and he figured that way nobody could get in his way and tell him that he was wrong about this, that, or the other thing. He just did his own thing. And it's a beautiful style. I still practice every day, literally to this day.
Yeah, it's politics ruins martial arts so often. That's any friend I talk to, any style, you hear a similar story. As far as a large scale, like a Ed Parker Kempo type thing, and even small local scales like that and stuff. It's so sad.
Yeah. It is sad. I've never known a group to not have problems, and I tell people this all the time. There's 2 things that I know of in this world that should be beautiful, should be nothing but good, and should help a person help themselves and also help other people, and that's religion and martial arts. And the sad truth is those are the 2 things that are perverted so much by people because of ego, politics, money, jealousy, greed. And so you take something so beautiful and you turn it into something ugly. And it gives everybody a bad name, because if one person has a bad experience, then if you tell them you're in the martial arts, that's, "Oh, well, I know what you guys are all about. I don't want to have anything to do with you."
Right.
Same thing with religion or anything else like that.
So how far into your training did you start getting or realize that maybe you would enjoy teaching? Was that something, did everyone teach, or is it just something you were drawn to for a certain reason?
Well, my teacher taught us to teach.
Okay.
And that was part of our training was to be a teacher. Both my first Okinawan karate instructor here in the States and my Okinawan karate instructor also, they wanted you to be able to teach. And for several reasons, obviously, yes, because that helps the style grow and stay vibrant and dynamic. And also you learn so much by teaching. When you have to break something down and teach it to somebody, especially to somebody who doesn't come by it naturally, you're forced to examine it inside, outside, upside, downside, backwards, frontwards, to try and get that information conveyed to that person. So that's why they wanted it done. And I ended up getting thrust into teaching way, way, way before I should have, because there just was nobody else. And I started teaching probably assistant instructing at a satellite school in 1980. Okay. And then my teacher up in Bemidji, Minnesota, ended up leaving the dojo to me in 1985. And I've taught ever since then.
One thing I noticed too, as far as teaching, is I go back and look at my notes from like when I first started martial arts. I've been lucky enough. I had an instructor that taught me to take notes and write stuff down. And I look at the notes from when I was teaching for the same techniques. And it's interesting how I describe them differently when you're teaching it versus when you're learning it.
Oh, yes. Pat Miletich, a guy that I'm very familiar with. I trained with him, been blessed to know him as
a great guy.
A mentor. I was an affiliate instructor under him for a while. He used to say the smartest guy in the room has got a pen and a notebook to write this stuff down. And It's because you're only going to remember so much, and it doesn't take much to jog your memory if you write down just some key points. But if you don't have them, you're gonna lose a certain amount of it, and that's a shame.
I got to sit next to Pat at some fights down in Sioux Falls, South Dakota, from the Access TV RFA.
Oh,
yeah, he was commentating, and I was the judge sitting right next to him, so we got to chat in between each fight and stuff. And such nice, super
nice guy and a brilliant mind.
Yes.
And a lot of people don't realize he had a traditional background before he got into MMA.
Yep.
He had a traditional karate background. And, of course, wrestling. He lived in Iowa, so you don't live in Iowa and not wrestle.
Right.
And kickboxing, and he's a very well-rounded guy. And I think that's one of the things that led him to being as wonderfully successful as he was, not only as a competitor, but as a coach of, at the time, might be disputable, but most people will say that for several years, his gym was the best in the world.
Oh, I would agree completely. Yeah. So nowadays, with as popular as the UFC has become and MMA and whatnot, so many people now join strictly MMA schools. Mm-hmm. In your opinion, do you think it's still important to have that traditional background? I mean,
depends on what you want. If you want to be an MMA competitor, there are so many gyms out there now. That's what they do, and they teach you all aspects of the sport. So if that's your goal, if you want to be an MMA fighter, go to an MMA gym, but go to one that will teach you the stand-up, not just boxing, not just kickboxing, but the total stand-up package as it applies to MMA. And has the wrestling component in it, because you have to have the wrestling either offensively or defensively. And that has a good jiu-jitsu or some kind of a submission catch wrestling, some kind of a submission-based art, and somebody that can put the whole thing together. It's one thing to have the pieces and to be good at individual pieces, but to put it together in that seamless package, that's the ticket to success. And that's where a guy like Pat, he had everything in his gym. He had much underrated jiu-jitsu in his gym. Obviously, they had world-class wrestling. They're some of the toughest humanoids on the planet were in that gym that people never even heard of. People that world champions looked at when it came time to roller spar and shook their heads and walked to the other side of the gym, hoping that somebody else would go with these guys because they were just animals. And then, of course, the kickboxing, the hands, everything. But if that's your goal, go to an MMA gym and go to a good one. Shop around, because they're not all good. They're not all what they say they are.
That's with any martial arts school.
Yes,
they're not all good, unfortunately. Exactly. But back up a little bit. You said you inherited your school in 1985. Jump ahead a few years from that. How did the whole UFC thing come about? Was that something that you looked for? Were you contacted?
No, that was also kind of just dropped in my lap. I remember one day one of my karate students came in and he had a copy of Black Belt magazine in his hand, and he's all excited. He was a very excitable guy, and he's wide-eyed and look at this, oh my God, you got to see this, there's this thing, this ultimate fighting thing, and it's full contact, and there's hardly any rules, and it's perfect for you, and this, you need to write a letter to these people, and you need, because look at that, the ad says they're looking for competitors, and I'd learned to take this guy with a little bit of a grain of salt, because like I said, he was a pretty excitable guy, but I read it, and I went, oh my God, and my eyebrows went up, and I looked at the winner, and I said, hey, he's about my size, so obviously, you can be successful without being 250 pounds, and well, yeah, and I read the article, and I said, well, okay, I'll write a letter. So I wrote a letter to Art Davie on my manual typewriter in 1990. See, that was in 94, and so it was in March 94 was UFC 2, and it was just like a month or two before that I wrote him a letter. Put it in an envelope, mailed it to him, and got an answer back and said thanks but no thanks. It's everything's full. We've got every fighter that we need, but I'm going to keep your letter, and maybe somewhere down the line I'll need somebody and I'll give you a call. And so I thought, okay, it was worth a shot, and went about my business, and I'll never forget it. It was on a Saturday. I always had classes Saturday mornings, and then when we were done with class, we would go out and have lunch together, the students and I, and then I would go back home. I was living at the dojo at the time, and no voicemail. It was an answering machine with the cassette tape in it, and the light was blinking, and I played it, and said, hey, this is Art Davie. I really need you to contact me. It's really, really important, and I want you to come down to Denver for the UFC. And I went, oh my God. I called him, but he wasn't there, and so I left a message on his answering machine, which he probably had a cassette too, and Monday, I ended up connecting with him, and he said, hey, yeah, he says, one of my main card fighters, Ken Shamrock, broke his hand. He He said, so I'm going to take one of the alternates that I've already had in place, move him up into the main card. I would like you to come down and take the alternate spot. And a little bit more irony that the alternate that he brought up to the main card was Johnny Rhodes. And him and I got personally introduced later on, obviously. So I said, sure, yeah, I'd love to. And we're talking, and I said, well, will I get to fight the other alternate? Because I knew in UFC 1 from what I'd read that the two alternates fought in like a preliminary bout. He said, no. He says, we're not going to do that because this is a 16-man tournament. The last one was an 8-man tournament. There's not going to be any time for that. I was a little disappointed, and I said, well, I said, under what circumstances will I get to fight? He says, the only way you're going to fight is if somebody doesn't show up before the fight, or between now and fight night, somebody gets injured or sick and can't fight. Other than that, he said, we won't need you. He said, but hey, you're going to get a free ticket to Denver. We'll put you up at a nice hotel. We'll give you $50 a day to eat on. And I thought, yeah. Why not? Sounds good to me. Yeah. So I did. And it was close enough to the fight. It was less than 2 weeks out. I think it was, I talked to him on a Monday. It wasn't, the UFC's back in those days were on Fridays, and it wasn't that same Friday, but it was the next Friday. So it was like, 13 days out. So he FedExed me the tickets, and I went out there. That's how I got there.
And then you actually ended up getting to fight. And
that's a whole other twist of fate. We got there earlier in the week, Monday or Tuesday, and the fighters were trickling in, and I saw most of them. I saw Hoist Gracie in the Gracie train, which was, you would hear a rustle of nylon. And there were where you saw one Gracie, most of the time you saw about a dozen of them. And they all, they'd come rustling down there, and a formidable looking group. They didn't smile a lot. They were real serious before the fight. And come Thursday night, they had a press party. What I was told at that point, Art Davey came up to me and he says, hey, he said, again, irony here, the last fighter just showed up, Johnny Rhodes. And so the card is full. Everybody's healthy. Everybody's good to go. Fight's good to go tomorrow night. We're not going to use you. Thanks a lot. Appreciate it. Love the way you handle yourself. You're a nice guy. I'm going to bring you back for another one. Okay. And fight night came around, and originally the event was supposed to be at the McNichols Arena, but that got pulled because of political pressure, and we ended up at the Mammoth Event Center.
That's right.
On Skid Row. And I'm serious, it was on Skid Row. There's no exaggeration. There was drunks, addicts, passed out on the sidewalk that we literally were stepping over. And the Mammoth Event Center didn't have enough dressing rooms or warm-up areas at all to handle what we had. So they rented a hotel across the road, which was, man, they ought to make a movie that's probably not still standing, but if it was, they should make a movie just about that hotel. No doors on some of the rooms, people making drug deals in the rooms as we're going by there. And it was incredible. So, and some of the fighters were over there before the fight, and some of them were at some little corner of the Mammoth Event Center. And Art was probably growing gray hair as we were working the event. And he comes up to me and he says, hey, you know the fighters, you have an idea where they're at. He said, I got to keep this thing moving because it's going to be on pay-per-view. I've got a schedule. He says, I want you to go, and when I tell you who I need to bring up here, I want you to go get them, bring them up here to the staging area, and then go back and get the next one. I said, sure, I'm there anyway, might as well. So I went out, started getting fighters, bringing them up. And I had just brought up Minoki Ichihara, the guy who Hoist Gracie fought in his first UFC 2 bout. And I turned around and was going back, and I was going downstairs, and Horian Gracie was coming upstairs. Grabs me by the arm, and he goes, are you ready to fight? And I gave him a really stupid look, I'm sure, and went like, huh? You mean now? And he says, yes. Hammaker hurt his hand, and he cannot fight. I need you to fight. And I went, okay. And so then I had to go and find my guys. I had 2 guys there with me. Get them, get my gear, my gi basically, my gi, my mouth guard, my cup, and find a place to warm up. And remember I told you about the guy that got all excitable when he showed? Well, he was one of the guys I brought with me, and he was going into orbit. He was just spinning into orbit. And the other guy was the actual opposite. Still a wonderful friend of mine today. I just saw him on this trip. And he grabs the guy and pulls him out away from me so I could try and get a little time to get focused on what was going on. Well, despite his best efforts, it didn't work, obviously, because the main thing that happened to me was I was just freaked out. I remember walking towards the cage through all the artificial smoke, and the guys walking behind me with the camera pointed up at my face. And I walked into the cage, and I heard the clink, and I looked across, and there was this big, angry-looking dude across the way. And next thing I know, let's get it on, Big John. And the first punch that hit me, first real solid punch that hit me right above my eye, and it blinded me. My eye went completely white. It was like looking through a glass of milk. I couldn't see anything.
Wow.
And so part of what was going on that I took so much heat for, when I was down on the ground and I was posted up on one elbow and had one hand up, I was trying to keep him off of me, thinking that I could clear my eye. And I remember starting to wipe at my eye, thinking it was blood. And then the things that you remember are really weird. And I remember thinking, well, you idiot, blood isn't white. It's not blood. So then I thought, well, I must have detached my retina. And I thought, well, all right, let's see if we can get this thing turned around. But obviously, no, I was just too out of it psychologically.
Right.
So,
I mean, yeah, you had less than an hour before your fight. You didn't think you were fighting
about
probably.
15 minutes.
Yeah,
15 minutes, something like that.
That's insane. Yeah. So then after that happened, obviously you went back and continued teaching MMA. How long before you decided to embrace that and start cross training? I know, and I mean, now you fully teach, you do a lot of the cross training yourself, and you've fought MMA again since then, which we'll talk about in a bit.
Okay. Right away. Okay. Actually, I've never been accused of being the smartest guy in town, and the Mensa Society recruiters are not beating down my door, but I like to try and learn from my mistakes. And so immediately I knew that there was more that I had to do. Like I said, the main breakdown was between my ears and above my eyebrows. I was freaked out. I let the situation get the better of me. But if you're a good martial artist, you shouldn't let that happen. And so I knew I had to work on that. And yeah, looking at what was going on the ground and everything, I was not unfamiliar with joint locks. We do a lot of that in Okinawan karate. A lot of people don't realize that. We do a lot of elbow locks, wrist locks, chokes, throws, but we don't do them so much on the mat. We do them more from a standing position. Right. And our idea was always we wanted to stay on our feet because we weren't designed for a sport. We were designed more for defending ourselves. And in defending ourselves, we didn't want to be on the ground. But the reality is, especially nowadays, because so many people train, you're probably going to end up on the ground, no matter how bad you want to stay on your feet. Because if you think you can stop a determined wrestler from putting you ass over tea kettle onto the ground, good luck, because you're in for a rude awakening.
Yep.
And seeing all that, I knew that not only for myself, but if I was going to call myself a good instructor and I was going to tell my students, I'm teaching you stuff that will help you, that can possibly save you in self-defense, I had to learn that stuff. Otherwise, I'd be what I really didn't like, a phony. Somebody pretending to be something that they're not. So I immediately tried to find different people to work with to shore up those areas and then work on myself mentally to try and make sure that no matter what happened, I would never get overwhelmed by the event again. And the thing that people, it's hard to understand. It's hard to explain to people. It wasn't self-defense because I had time to think, but I didn't have enough time to think. Right. I had just enough time to think to screw my brain up. But it wasn't like if you get attacked on the street where, boom, you just react without thinking. Okay, that's one thing. But another thing, when you're in front of hundreds or thousands of people, however many were in there that night, and you've got the smoke and you've got the whole thing that's so foreign to you. I've always, my whole adult life, been an introvert. Mm-hmm. I'm a recluse, more like, kind of like a hermit. I'd be a happy hermit. So being out there like that and putting myself out there was a very foreign thing to me. And so the combination of all of the things that happened psychologically and physically, because if I'd have been really good on the ground, I could have maybe taken Johnny Rhodes down and neutralized him for a little bit to get my bearings back. But back in those days, there weren't a whole lot of people that could do that. There was Hoist Gracie and there was a few others, but most of them, no.
And the Gracies knew that going in. I mean, I'm glad they did this, and because obviously what it's led to. But I mean, the whole thing was done to promote the Gracies and promote Gracie Jiu-Jitsu for the most part. But it also changed martial arts completely.
It did, and they were right to promote themselves.
Exactly.
They had and still have something that's excellent. It's good, improved.
They can back it up.
Yeah, they can back it up. They're not just talking the talk; they're walking the walk, and they did it back, in this country in the very beginning. Yep. And they always have my respect and my gratitude, because they opened my eyes and a lot of other people's eyes. And I've talked to Royce a few times since then, and he's a real nice guy. A lot of people think that he's kind of aloof or cold. He's not. If you approach him the right way, he's the nicest guy you'll ever meet, and a great instructor. I've seen him teach, and the whole family has done a world of good for all of us.
So how old were you when your first MMA fight then?
38.
Okay. And how old were you in your second MMA fight?
53.
So what led to that? What part of you decided, I'm going to do my comeback. I need to redeem myself, or I've learned a lot more since then. What kind of led to that thinking?
Well, I was unsettled the whole time. Mm-hmm. I couldn't put it to rest. I couldn't get it out of my head. I mean, I didn't wake up in the middle of the night thinking about it, and I didn't spend my days obsessing over it. But I was very disappointed, obviously, and the abuse that I took on the new thing called the internet was unbelievable and extraordinarily hurtful to me. And it really complicated a lot of other really traumatic events in my life. Mm-hmm. So, I at some point just decided that, man, I just can't get this out of my blood. What am I going to do? And I figured the only thing I could do would be go back and try it again. And I train every day. And 53 is really old to be doing that, but I didn't have a lot of fight miles on me. I hadn't taken a whole lot of pounding. I was in really good shape, and when I decided to do this, I got in even better shape. I had some. There's a lot of really good wrestling in Missouri, mm-hmm. and I had some really good wrestlers that trained with me, and I had them put me through the grinder. I sparred hard, I rolled hard, and conditioning is something that I take a lot of pride in. And so I got myself in really good condition.
You actually got to prepare for this one.
I got to prepare for this one, yeah. And Pat Miletich gets a lot of credit because, even though I wasn't training with him at the time, he wasn't in my corner, my training techniques were a lot founded on what I learned from Pat. So I was in good shape and I was ready to go. And I thought, well, the way to get this thing out of your blood is to go back and do it again. And people would say, well, what if you lose again? And I looked at him, I said, you know what? I'd rather go to my grave 0-2 than 0-1. And people didn't understand it. I said, if I'm 0-1, that means I never went back. I took a beating and I was scared to go back and try it again. And I was hiding. And I don't hide from anything. I make a lot of mistakes in life, and I try to own up to them and take responsibility as a man for things that go right or go wrong. And so being 0-2 would have been better than being 0-1 in my mind. And I probably wouldn't have stopped at 0-2. I probably would have went back and tried again as long as they'd let me fight. And the Minnesota Commission, I think, did me a big favor by sanctioning that fight, because I know they took a lot of heat for licensing me at 53 years old.
And how old was your opponent?
He was 24, 23.
So I think that's where a lot of the heat came from. I remember that. Yeah. I think just because they're like, you're fighting a guy half your age, and they thought you were going to get hurt.
Yeah. Well, yeah. And on the outside, not knowing me, I can understand that. But I would have willingly went to a combine of sorts or a tryout. I would have willingly underwent much more rigorous physical to prove that I was, not going to make anybody sorry that they licensed me for the fight.
And what were the results of your last MMA fight?
Yeah, they're better than the first one. I stopped my opponent in the first round.
That's right. I've seen the video. That's why I had to ask that. It's got to make you feel proud. And obviously it accomplished what you wanted.
Well, yes, it did. And the main thing I wanted to accomplish was not for anybody else. I wasn't out to show the world. I was out to show myself. And I guess in a way I was out to show the world now that when I'm talking about it, because I wanted to represent myself in a way that win, lose, or draw, I could at least hold my head up. And I couldn't do that after UFC 2. Right. My head was down. I was very disgusted. And as hard as people were on me, nobody was harder on me than I was, because I had an opportunity. Back in the very beginning of something that grew to be so huge, I had an opportunity and I squandered that opportunity. And that part does still haunt me, that I had the opportunity to really make a mark and really be something special for this thing that grew up to be this magnificent sport that we have now. But that second fight was for me to be able to hold my head up and to not be dwelling on how badly I did the first time.
It's great. That's a great attitude to have, though, too. So, I mean, that's, I know I was very proud when I saw that. I'm like, that's awesome. Because you looked good.
I had a lot of support. And, people who I knew, people who I've never met, I had a lot of people really pulling for me. And that meant a lot to me, too, especially considering the way things were not too long before that, because the heat that I took lasted hard for about 12 years. And then it really turned really quickly. And I'm not in this world to get the approval of other people. Right. I don't live for other people. But if I'm honest, I have to say that it sure feels a lot better when people aren't kicking you when you're down, and they're supporting you and helping you up. And I got a lot of that. And I still, to this day, most MMA people, they don't know who I am. They don't care. It was one fight back in the last millennium, and nobody's thinking about that. But the hardcore fans still remember, and they treat me very kindly now.
That's good. So just a few more questions to wrap it up. I know we've gone a little longer than we talked about, but first question is, with a traditional background and as an instructor, if someone were to approach you, what type of advice do you give to a parent seeking martial arts for their kids? Any kind of tips or information you give them on what to look for in an instructor in a school?
Well, first thing I ask them is, what are they looking for? What's their goal? What do they want little Johnny or little Susie to do? What do they want them to gain out of this? And then I gauge whatever my response is on that. If they want their son or daughter to be a competitor, then I steer them somewhere else, because I'm not going to make an MMA competitor out of a 10-year-old.
Right.
I could set a foundation for them, but if they want them to compete in like karate tournaments, taekwondo tournaments, judo tournaments, things like that, then I'm not the guy, and I'll refer them to somebody who does. And right now I don't have an actual kids program, so I'll refer them to somebody who does, somebody who I think would really serve them well.
Okay.
The one exception to that is I've got this kid right now. I've only literally have 3 students in Kansas City. I've only got 3 students. One of them is a 15-year-old, and I met him probably 10 years ago. Oh, maybe not 10, maybe about 8 years ago. He was young and very small, and he's this little ginger. He's this little red-haired kid, skinny, and I was renting space inside of a Jeet Kune Do Filipino martial arts combination school, and he was training with them. And one day about 3 years ago, his dad, who is extremely supportive, always brought him to class, always stayed there, watched, supported him, just a wonderful parent. He comes up to me and he says, I want Ethan to come into your Saturday morning sparring class. We used to do Saturday morning MMA sparring, hard, takedowns, the whole 9 yards. My eyebrows went up and I went, oh. I said, you sure? I said, I promise you that we're not going to injure him, but I'm not going to baby him either. And he goes, well, exactly. He says, I don't want him babied. He says he needs to grow, to learn how it really feels to go hard, and he needs to come out of his shell a little bit. And so in the beginning, we took it real easy on him, and we had to. But what a kid! My God, he kept coming back, and he's a sponge. You teach him something, and he learns it so quickly. He learned the ground. I brought in a black belt Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu instructor, Travis Connolly, to do at least once a month, just specifically BJJ.
Okay.
And he took to that. Ethan took to that. And we taught him basic wrestling, and he really took to that. And he started to crack harder and harder when we were hitting. And now he's 15 years old now. I put some clips up on my Facebook of him hitting the Thai pads. And he's incredible. I am real glad I'm holding pads and he's not hitting me. And in the beginning, I would have let him hit me as hard as he wanted. It didn't matter. But man, he's really good. So he started as a kid with me, and as he got bigger and better, then I and the guys, I had more than just 3 at the time. I'm down to 3 now. But everybody who worked with him, we would kind of raise our level just a little bit above his, so that he would really get, and we really pushed him, really pushed him, so that he could realize what he was capable of, and that what he was capable of was so much more than what he thought he was capable of. Because he'd be tired and he'd get hurt, not injured. Big difference between getting injured and getting hurt.
Yep.
And he would just grit his teeth. And I tell people, I said, pin your ears back, bite down on your mouth guard and go, figure it out. And martial arts is beautiful. It'll teach you everything you need to know about life, how to solve problems, how to overcome adversity, how to push through pain, how to do things you don't want to do, how to take a problem and turn it into an advantage. Sometimes you have to go straight in. Sometimes you have to go in at an angle. Sometimes you have to withdraw, retreat a little bit, and then counter. And that's life. That's dealing with people. That's martial arts teaches you all of that. Any true martial art should go outside of the gym or outside of the dojo with you and become part of you and improve your life in every aspect. How you deal with people, how you do in school, how you do at work, everything should get better. And this kid is a shining example of that because he does great in school. He's a respectful, nice young man, and he works and I've had karate students like that too. I've had several karate students over the decades that I've got one now in Bemidji. He's an adult now. He's a 2-tour Army vet. Did a tour in Afghanistan, a tour in Iraq. When he went into the Army, I told him the Army's going to love you because you're in shape, disciplined. You've got everything that they want. I said, but you got to promise me one thing. And he said, what's that? I said, don't be a door gunner in a chopper because I'm Vietnam era.
Yep.
And those guys didn't live very long. And he listened to everything I said except for that because he became a crew chief in a chopper in Iraq and in Afghanistan, and he survived it. But he told me in the very beginning, he said, thank you for what you did for me. He said, because the Army's nothing compared to what you put me through. He said, this is easy for me. He said, I see other people struggle, fail, get traumatized by all these things. He said, but I was ready. He says, and it's a large part because of the foundation that you laid for me all those years in karate class. So that's, martial arts is life and it's beautiful. And it should teach you to be tough and to fight, but it should teach you so much more than that too.
Next question is there a favorite philosophy that you've learned over the years in martial arts? Maybe one or two or one specific one that stands out or that you really hold true to yourself?
Shut up and train, like I said before.
I like that one.
The name of my LLC is Damai Bushi Martial Arts, and Damai Bushi means quiet warrior or quiet knight.
Okay.
And my Okinawan teacher, 1 year, I was with him every year for many, many years. He would come to the States. I would go to Okinawa. And 1 year I had to leave him early because I had just gotten a new job and I had to go to work before I rejoined him again. And as I was driving out, my friend said that he looked at him and he says, I think Fred is Damai Bushi. And asked him, and later on his son, what exactly does that mean? I know it means quiet one who doesn't talk too much. And they said, it means somebody who doesn't bullshit. So, and that's their words.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah? Somebody no bullshit, who doesn't talk but just does. Somebody who maybe might know 10 things but only shows 1 or 2. Doesn't show off, doesn't brag, doesn't have an ego. That is something that I try and live by. One of the things in my logo for that company means outside soft, inside hard. Okay. And what that means, like with most things Okinawan, it's very deep and has a lot of meanings, and it's really nothing that you can literally translate. But the way it was explained to me was very similar. Somebody who on the outside is kind, accepts people for who they are, and if somebody is doing their best, even if it's not very good, they're okay with it as long as a person is trying and they're very kind about it. But inside, they never accept that from themselves. They drive themselves. They push themselves. It's never good enough. They're always trying to improve. And to me, that's very important. And that's what I tried to do my whole adult life. That's what I tried to do after the UFC. That's what I try and do today, not just in the dojo or the gym, but in my life, so that I can be not only a better martial artist, but a better man, and a better person, a better human being.
Do you have a favorite martial arts book, either that you like reading continually or that you recommend to others?
Well, I read a lot of the books written by MMA personalities. I really enjoyed Blood in a Cage, which was about Pat.
Great book.
Of course, yeah. Because I'm a great admirer of Pat. I really enjoyed George St. Pierre's book. Really good, because his philosophy, his way of looking at things is very martial arts. It's not really it's not sports centric. It's martial arts, because he says, I train all the time, not just for a fight. I train all the time. So I'm always growing, always improving, always getting better, always learning. Well, that's just like what I just talked about. And he, for all that he accomplished, and very much on almost everybody's extremely short list for the pound for pound best that's ever been, it doesn't seem like he has an ego. And I really admired that. Another book that I enjoyed was Living the Martial Way by Forrest, Forrest Morgan, I think. He was an Air Force officer, and I'll forgive him for that. But it was something I was surprised when I read that book about, it talks about how a martial artist lives, what's important to be a martial artist, how a martial artist approaches things. And I haven't read it in a long time. I just saw it on my friend's bookshelf the other day, and I thought, man, I got to read that again, because that was an excellent book. So
Okay.
I'd say those 3 books are books that I would highly recommend.
Cool. And then final question, or possibly 2 questions, depending. Favorite martial arts TV show and or movie? Ended on a fun one. Sorry, maybe a guilty pleasure.
Oh, God. Favorite martial arts TV show or movie? All right, I'm going to admit that I watched Cobra Kai.
Oh, I love it. It's a great show.
I binge watched both seasons. I had to stay home from work a little bit because I injured myself, and I put myself on the shelf because it was a head and neck injury, and so I didn't let myself go to teach class. My wife was out of town, and I thought, all right, I'll watch it. And as I expected, the karate sucked. It was terrible.
Yeah.
And my pet peeve is there are so many good martial artists and stunt people out there. Why can't you get somebody to do something better? But that show, just like the Karate Kid, wasn't about the physical rendering of martial arts.
Right.
There's some good storylines in there. There's some good messages in there. It's kind of fun, and it's definitely a guilty pleasure. And of course, I remember back the Bruce Lee days, Enter the Dragon,
Yes.
Those. And another guilty pleasure, in the beginning, I liked Steven Seagal. I liked like Above the Law. That was the first
Hard to
thing that I
Kill.
saw.
Yep.
Those movies I enjoyed. Then after that, I was like, it's not what I remember.
Right.
But,
So now one quick thing on Cobra Kai. Did you rewatch the movies close to watching the series, or the original 3 Karate Kid movies, or did you just...
No, I haven't watched those in decades, probably.
You should rewatch them and then watch it again, because there's a lot more you'll catch.
Yeah, I'm sure of that.
I watched like 2 episodes and I'm like, wait a second, I need to rewatch the movie. And I went and rewatched it, and I caught so much more after doing that. So it's like you said, it's fun. It's all about fun. So
Yeah, it's a guilty pleasure. It's fun, and you don't have high expectations going in as far as physically what they're going to do.
Right. Well, Fred, I just want to thank you again for taking the time to do this. I really do appreciate taking time out of your personal life to sit down and chat with us and learn a little bit more about you, some stuff I didn't know and everything. And I truly appreciate it.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate the opportunity.
All right, enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to Everyday Martial Artist. We hope you will join us every week for a brand new episode with a different martial artist telling their story. If you enjoy the show, be sure to leave us a review. Also, be sure to check out our website at everydaymartialartist.com. There you can find all of our episodes and contact us to suggest guests and ask questions. Again, thanks for listening to Everyday Martial Artist, and we'll see you next week.